Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am honored that the Imam asked me to come this afternoon on this blessed Jummah day to give the pre-Jummah reflection. So, inshallah, I will be speaking for a few minutes. Hopefully by 1 o'clock I'll be done, or maybe sooner, and then we can do our Jummah prayer, inshallah. So, today, I was asked to come speak to y'all because of the topic of the day. It's called Juneteenth. And I'll say it again, Juneteenth. And Juneteenth is actually, well, I believe it was, yesterday maybe, whenever the 17th of June was actually, yeah. The 17th was the day that President Biden signed it in to be a federal holiday. And Juneteenth actually is a day that Juneteenth actually happens on June 19th, which I believe is tomorrow, actually, if I have my dates right. And so it's a new federal holiday. It's happening tomorrow. We're talking about it here. You know, what is Juneteenth? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what that is, okay? So, Juneteenth happened on June 19th in 1865 in the United States, in Texas specifically. For those of us who know a little bit about U.S. history, 1865 is at the end of the Civil War in the United States, a war that was primarily fought about ending slavery in the United States, right? Northern states, being against it, southern states, needing enslaved Africans for their economy, and so we fought a big war about it, okay? Along the way, in 1862, by the way, President Abraham Lincoln delivered the Emancipation Proclamation, which was his sort of like a federal presidential order, right, in 1862, right? So this is 3 years before the date that we're talking about, right? That essentially made slavery illegal in the United States, right? At least from his proclamation. After that, we had the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which really wrote slavery out of the Constitution and gave enslaved folks the rights of citizenship, or supposed to, at least it was supposed to, okay? What's really interesting, there's a lot of interesting things. What's really interesting about the story of Juneteenth is that this happened in June, and the Confederate forces, the forces who were fighting for slavery, had actually surrendered in April. Okay, so this is 2 months after, it's a really official, right? Because now the Northern Union forces have won. Now they can enforce those rules, across the country. And so here we have a Army General, Gordon Granger, who's coming into Texas. This is 2 months after, right? The Southern Confederate states have surrendered, and he encountered, and this is happening all along the way, right? But he's encountering enslaved Africans who allegedly didn't know that they were free now, right? And so Juneteenth represents sort of, because, and Texas was sort of like one of the westernmost states, right, that was still enslaving African folks, right? And so Juneteenth, what it really represents, especially amongst the African American community, is the day that, in essence, we all became free, right? I mentioned many other times before the Emancipation Proclamation, right, 13th Amendment, but there were still, after those times, still people who were living, in bondage, right? And so the day is really supposed to commemorate, especially amongst African American folks, the day that all of us became free. Now, I want to come back to that. That's important. What does it mean if some of us are free, if others of us aren't, right? So that I'll come back to that, okay? And by the way, just because I'm a nerd and I like history, just to be really clear, actually, there were still 2 states, Delaware and Kentucky, who didn't actually abolish slavery until after that, until the next year. So it didn't really totally officially end slavery, but it's a day that African American communities have commemorated or marked as a day to really mark, the day that we all sort of became free. Okay. Now let me just, and I promise, well, I'll end this conversation just to think about what does this mean for us in our community as Muslims in particular. Okay. But let me just say a few more things. So let me say a few myths about Juneteenth so that we can have a more honest understanding of the history of it. So one, I already named one of the myths, right? One of the myths is that the slavery ended on that day. It didn't, because there were still some places, spotty places where it was still happening here and there. So that's one myth, okay? Two, another myth about the day is that the enslaved Africans in Texas, the story is often told that they didn't know they were free, right? That they didn't know that until the Northern Army general shows up and tells them, okay, now you're free, right? The reality is that black folks across the entire United States, enslaved or otherwise, they had heard about the Emancipation Proclamation. They knew about the wars that were going on, right? But there's a difference between knowing that and then being able to live free, right? And so what really happened on that day more than anything was less that they found out that they were free, right? It was more that when the Union Army showed up, their freedom could be enforced, right? Because they found out they were free before that, but if they tried to assert that freedom at that time without the protection of the federal government, they were going to be killed, essentially, right? And so, so it wasn't that they didn't know they were free. It was that there was powers that be to enforce their freedom at that point. I hope that makes sense, okay? And here's the third, and I think most important myth about this day, but about the narrative of black freedom, especially when it comes to being free from enslavement, right? The sort of common narrative that we get is that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, right? With the Emancipation Proclamation, the slaves were free, okay? That did happen, right? His ability and his desire to do that is on the backs of black folks enslaved and free at that time, who had been organizing for decades and years and years and years to make that even a political issue to even think about, okay? And black folks fought in the Civil War, right? They were soldiers in that war to be able to have that general walk up to Texas years later and say, you're free, right? So black folks freed themselves. Abraham Lincoln didn't free it, but it took, with the help of Allah, black folks did free ourselves. Okay, yes, we needed the help of this and that, but it wasn't that we were just waiting there for someone to come free us, right? And then it happened, but we did work, and we made the way for that to be able to happen. Okay, and that's important, because I think a lot of the history that we get about black people are black people as victims, as in this country, as victims, and people who are just waiting for that, mythical figure to come save us. No, we've been saving ourselves the entire time, right? And we've been creating the conditions that have allowed, right, with the help of Allah, we've been creating those conditions to allow the leaders to be able to come in and do those things, okay? So those are some myths. And there's another really hard truth. I promise it's gonna end on a positive. But there's another really hard truth about Juneteenth, right? It's a day, the hard truth is the struggle for black folks didn't end on June 19, 1865, right? Even just a simple, reading of history can tell you that, right? And so in some ways, some folks might wonder, well, what are we celebrating? Yes, has there been progress since 1865? Most definitely, right? Are we where we need to be as black people or as a country? I mean, I think the answer to that is no, okay? And so that really raises the question, well, I'll come back to that, but the hard truth is that day didn't end the struggle, okay? Now, the beautiful part about it is this, right? The beautiful part is that struggle for black folks to assert our citizenship, to assert our humanity in this country, has produced many, many beautiful things, including this, right? Including this, right? I love coming to Jumma here. I love coming to the session. You just look around. This is inspirational, right? This is a multi-racial, multinational group of people coming together next to each other in community, right? That is not, we should not take that for granted. In general, even in the United States, right? That does not happen. That did not happen naturally. That's been part of this. That's been part of the beautiful fruit, right? That has come from the struggle as Black folks have been trying to assert their citizenship and their humanity, right? And so yes, there's still work to be done, very much so, right? And it's creating beautiful, and the work that needs to be done, the work that we're doing, is creating beautiful things along the way, alhamdulillah, right? So that being said, what should Juneteenth mean to us in our community? And I mean as Muslims in particular, okay? What should it mean to us, okay? So, one, we should be honoring those who Allah gave the strength and the wisdom, right, to pave the way for us today, right? We need to honor the people whose shoulders we're standing on to be able to have this beautiful community. I'll say more about that in a minute, right? But we need to be thinking about those whose shoulders we're standing on, right? So that we can have other people standing on our shoulders moving forward, okay? And we have to realize that as Muslims, first, and as American citizens and as citizens of Sharon, right? We have work to do. We still have work to do, okay? And what that really raises, right, when we think about Juneteenth, whether it's as Muslims, whether it's just as people, right? Is Juneteenth a celebration, right? Or is it a commemoration? And I want to make the distinction. Like, so if we're celebrating, if it's a celebration, what are we celebrating, right? Given that there's still, many Black folks can just walk out their door, right, and be a victim of police violence for doing absolutely nothing, right? So what's to celebrate if, our very humanity is still being challenged, right, indiscriminately, right? Or is it a commemoration, right? Is it a way of saying this was a moment, this was a key moment where we achieved some progress, right? And there's still work to be done, right? And that's the difference. If you treat it like a celebration, it really makes you begs the question, what are we celebrating? If we treat it like a commemoration, it's about honoring and realizing we still got stuff to do, okay? So, again, thinking about this community in particular, I've raised some of these questions and issues before, but I'll just do it here since I have an even bigger audience, right? So, just you don't have to, just think to yourselves, but how many of you chose to live here in Sharon or in this area, right? Or chose wherever you chose to live because of the schools, right? You wanted your children to go to good schools, right? What does that have to do with Juneteenth or Black folks? Well, we have to remember that it was the Black folks of this country who organized, right, to make it so that schools were places that were integrated, that were desegregated spaces. For many years, more years than not, right, schools were segregated by race. They had schools for white kids, schools for Black kids, so on and so forth, right? And Black people, we'll get to this, but Black people who were qualified or wanted to go to these schools couldn't go to them, right? Because there was laws against it, right? And so Black folks organized to be able to make it so that we could all go to these wonderful schools that we send our children to, right? That didn't just happen, right? That happened because people had to struggle and sacrifice, okay? And that also, right? Let's think about it this way. How many of us immigrated here because we were just looking for more rights, more human rights, more civil rights that we maybe had in the places that we were coming from, right? Again, like the consummate human civil rights struggle in the United States has been Black folks fighting for those things so that we could all have it. Okay? How many of us were like, man, I want to live in Sharon, right? It's a nice place to live. I can afford it. It's got great schools, right? Again, like I'll give a story of my wife's grandfather. He wanted to live in Schenectady, New York. He had the money, right? He could do it. He could afford it. The house is right there. He could not buy it. They would not let him buy that house. They would not let him live in that neighborhood. So what did he have to do? He actually had a friend who was white, right? Who was like an ally, right? who went and bought the house in his name, right? And then my grandparents paid him, and they moved in the dark of night, right? And then Schenectady became integrated, right? Or desegregated, right? So what does that mean? That means that folks, again, black folks had to put their lives, their livelihoods, their security, right, on the line to be able to make it so that a place like Sharon is a place where we can all live, right? And it wasn't about whether you had the money or not, because a lot of black folks had the money to move into the suburbs. They were just told no, right? I could go in even deeper into that, but I'm not going to go, right? We don't have enough time, okay? So, and by the way, how about this? How many of us either came to the United States or love being in the United States because of its amazing economic prosperity, right, that it has in the world, right? It's a place where there's an opportunity, right? The economic prosperity of the United States is built on the backs of the native lands that were stolen from those people, right? And the backs of black people who cultivated all that cotton and tobacco and other cash crops that were the original part of the economic, that's what created the economic prosperity of the United States, right? So, yeah, so a lot of what we have, a lot of what we hold dear, a lot of what this community that we can have right here, this place that we were allowed to buy and live in and be together in, right, is on the backs of the struggles of these folks, right, of black folks, okay? And so, and let's think about it one more way, right? And this is the beautiful part of this story, okay? Right? So we know, I'm running out of time. We know, right, that the first Africans that were brought here, right, as slaves, right, at least it says maybe 25 to 30% of those black folks were Muslim. Okay? So let's just think about this. The black folks who made it, like my ancestors, right? Like the black, people, there was boats that brought, this is back in the 16, 17, and 1800s, boats that would go from west coast of Africa to the United States. That's not an easy trip. Especially when you're in the bottom of a ship being moved like cargo, right? A lot of people died. Many of them died. Many people either just died along the way or even just killed themselves. They didn't want to see what's going to happen on the other end. So the black people who survived, the black people who are here are the ones who survived the Middle Passage. Strong people who survived that, okay? And then still here, right? I'm here now, right? And so what am I saying? The 25 or 30% of the black folks who came here were Muslim, right? And that their religion was intentionally, not just Muslims, but Muslims too, but is intentionally, systematically, right, stripped from them, right? Dehumanized. And yet, right, we have wonderful histories about, for example, Bilal Muhammadan, sometimes known as Ben Ali, right, was an enslaved man from Guinea who served basically as an imam for other Africans in an island off of Georgia in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And he scribed this thing called the Bilali document, right, which is basically like his attempt with like no resources, no scholars, no texts, right, to create a document that basically gave instructions about how to practice Islam, right, in these conditions where it was absolutely like banned and like taken away from them, right? And so we even in these attempts to take people away from their lands, right, bring them to these new places and strip them, right, of their religion, it persists. And so I'm coming to an end here, right? And so look at how Allah works, right? Look at his plan, right? These Africans are dragged away from their homes, stripped of their cultures, stripped of their religion, stripped of Islam, right? Or they try, right? And here I am. Right? This is not about me. This is not about me. I'm just saying, as part of a community. But here I am in front of you today as a Muslim, as a Muslim of African descent, right? In this community that is integrated, right? And multinational and multiracial, right? So I know I've been talking a lot about the negative things that have been going on, but what I'm also trying to let us understand is that when we work intentionally, either individually, right, or, and more importantly, collectively, which is the beautiful thing about this community, the collective work that we do together. Everyone who leaves this community and goes somewhere else, right, and they go to another bastion or another community somewhere else, it takes you 2 seconds to realize what we have here, okay? But it doesn't happen magically. It doesn't happen because Islam says there's no racism in Islam, right? Yes, right? That is, it's one thing that is the feature of Islam. There is no racism in Islam, but that doesn't happen just because Allah says so, right? It means that we have to work to that's a test for us, right? It's saying this is the test that we have to achieve, that we have to reach. And so that means that when we say there's no Islam and racism in Islam, that doesn't mean just like, okay, so now we're Muslims, so that means we're fine. No, that means we have a test among many, but we have a test to live up to that. And we have work to do individually and collectively to make that a reality, right? This community, this beautiful community that we see, that again, what I'm saying is, it didn't just happen. It happened because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put people in position to do the work, right? Whether it's on the level of government, financial, social, educational, to make this a possibility. And a lot of us are from places, and we know this. And just because it's like this today, right? A lot of us came from places where one day everybody was together, right? And then the next day, not so much, right? And for those of us who are in that situation, we know that better than any of us. Some of us in the United States, we're still, trying to wrap our heads around it. This is not automatic. This takes work. So what does this mean? So basically, a few things. It's our duty. So what does it mean? So Juneteenth. Let's bring it back, right? So it's our duty as Muslims to not forget, right? In order to know our history, right, as a form of justice in and of itself, right? We can't achieve justice now if we don't understand, the shoulders that we're standing on, the legacies that we're coming from as Muslims, definitely, and also as Americans. Right? So knowing is part of the justice, and knowing in a way that is, that does justice to the people. So a part of what I was trying to do in this education is not to frame Black people as victims and people who are, just waiting for people to be saved. No, we are fighters, right? We are resilient, right? We are trailblazers. We are scientists, right? Allah has blessed us in that way, right? And we had to do it under dire circumstances. But if we can see that truly as individuals and as people, that's going to put us in a better position, right, to work alongside with and be in community with our Black brothers and sisters. Okay, so we have to educate ourselves. We have to put ourselves in position to learn new things or unlearn old things. Okay. And we have to learn through the lens of strength and resilience, right? Seeing people through that lens, okay? And then we have to understand also, while there are huge accomplishments to celebrate, right? And many reasons to love this country, right? So many, like again, this view right here is it. Like this is what I'm talking about, right? But there's also still work to be done, right? Right? And whether we were born here, right? Or whether Allah brought us here, He put us here, right? In this place, in this country, in this community, for a reason, right? So we're blessed to be in a place where we can live in this diversity and live in this inclusive environment. And it's also an imperative for us to work to make that a possibility moving forward for the next generation and the next generation, right? And that's my last point. We have to continue, and mashallah, this community is so active, right? We have to continue to put ourselves in positions to be agents of justice. And that starts in our homes first. I'll say that again. It starts in our homes first, right? What does it mean to be doing justice way over there, and we're not doing justice right here, right? It starts in our homes first, and then we move out from there. right? And so that's what Juneteenth means to us. It's a commemoration of the work that's been done, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put people in a position to us to have this wonderful community that we have, and it is an imperative for us to keep doing the work to make it a reality moving forward. And all I ask is that I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy for us when we see injustice to change it with our hands, and if we can't do it with our hands, to speak out against it with our mouths, and if we can't do that, at the very least, hate it in our heart.